Hi, my name is Abbott-Saulteaux, and this is my video for ESST Teaching Controversies and Difficult Topics in Social Studies. So for part of my assignment, I had to have a difficult conversation with the TRC with a person of my choice. So for mine, I chose to speak with Jocelyn Corbeau. She's my sister who lives in Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan. So she is currently doing her first year of social studies. She's currently doing her first year of social work in the University of Regina and has not yet read the TRC herself. So I thought that we could have a really good conversation with it. So at first, I did want it to be more authentic. I wanted us to have more of a conversation than just me necessarily asking her questions and listing it down. So because I did want to have more of an open-ended, authentic feel to it, I did just write out some bullet points before talking and didn't necessarily make up a list of interview questions beforehand. So what we did is we had about an hour 45, maybe 2 hour talk over at her house. I brought over the book, so that's a final report. So I did start off the talk by asking her first what was her personal experience with learning about residential schools. So just kind of what was the first time that she remembered in school, what were kind of her teachers' attitudes towards them. I just wanted to kind of get a feel of what was her environment growing up like, what were her ideas and misconceptions about it. So I did hear, because she grew up in southern Saskatchewan, in Moose Jaw actually, she didn't have a lot of resources and wasn't exposed to a lot of Indigenous issues through the education system. So she said that she did learn more about residential schools, but it wasn't more until high school. It wasn't very comprehensive. So one thing that we talked about both is just in the education system, about how when the teacher is interested and passionate and enthusiastic about the topic that they're teaching, they're more likely to connect with students, and the students are more likely to connect with that material. So I really feel like even if she did get some of that education growing up, maybe it wasn't implemented in the right way for her to remember it in that meaningful way that we can. So like after talking more personally about it, we got it more into the actual book itself. So we kind of went through like an overview of it. We went through some of the history, some of the things she might have not knew, some of the things that I didn't know about before reading it. Like for instance, the arranged marriages, and how there was almost a bill passed in the 1960s actually about, 1922, about for a pupil or ex-pupil of the school to be married or be married without the permission of an Indian agent. So we kind of talked about some of the things that we didn't know beforehand, about the history about it, and then we went more into the legacy. So one thing that we both agreed on is that there are three main branches that really need to work together in order to make reconciliation possible. So if we're excluding the government, of course, then that would be the justice system, the welfare system, and the education system. And how these systems are all very integrated integrated with each other, dependent on each other, and they interact with each other a lot also. So what are some ways that we could, we just went through some of the calls to action and looked at some of those. So while we were also looking at it, we talked about the government in action. So at the beginning of it, we talked about how the commission had such a hard time starting with the multiple refusals of the government to participate in the commission. So, and linking that, we also talked about how Cindy Blackstock, who's actually one of Jocelyn's role models, was a truth holder in the book. And she also, while we were talking about government opposition, we started talking about Cindy Blackstock and her case against the Tribunal Human Rights And we talked about how the government surveilled Cindy Blackstock, and just back a couple years ago, just how just this month it was released that the government spent millions more than they released to the public about fighting Cindy Blackstock, even when they were already charged and like for guilty, even though they were already forced to pay it, and even though the commission has been asking again and again and again for them to make up to their promises. So we talked about how, like, while this is a very good start and while these are brilliant calls of action, they still do need to be implemented. And it's been 5 years since this book has been released, and still we're having these articles posted last month about how Cindy Blackstock is still getting government opposition. So it's still very much going on. We talked about racism in social media and how a lot of the legacies of residential schools could still be felt today and still is very much real and meaningful and relevant to topics of Indigenous issues today, and how there's just not enough people educated about it, and it's coming up more and more, I feel. Or maybe it's not, maybe it's just the climate, maybe it's just us being more aware of it at the same time also. But we talked about in social media how there has been a lot of racism lately and what we could do towards that, and how reconciliation is really about, it's really about empathy. It's about empathy, it's about forgiveness. It's about forgiveness not only on our side for being made to hold this burden for so long, but it's still important for reconciliation, even though all this stuff has happened, to still have that forgiving heart and to still think that, okay, these people just don't know any better. They weren't taught any better. They weren't offered those opportunities to be any better, right? And that's why I think that it's so important in education and welfare and justice system for these calls of actions to be implemented. And yeah, so we did, of course, it is kind of hard to summarize everything in such a short video. We did have long, detailed talks about some of these topics and more. But we both agree that change still needs to be made. And if I could end on the last sentence of the challenge of reconciliation. If I can end on the last paragraph of the challenges of If I can end on the last paragraph of the challenges of reconciliation. Reconciliation calls for federal, provincial, and territorial government action. Reconciliation calls for national action. The way we govern ourselves must change. Laws must change. Policies and programs must change. The way we educate our children and ourselves must change. The way we do business must change. Thinking must change. The way we talk to and about to each other must change.